Welcome to Being Human. I'm your host, Steve Cuss. On Being Human, we take a look at the dynamics that infect all of your relationships, not just your relationships with other people, but also your relationship with yourself and your relationship with God. We look at triggers and reactivity and false needs and predictable patterns that get in the way of you thriving, you being well with your people, and not so much being well with God, but you being able to grow in your awareness of God. It turns out that reactivity and triggers, they tend to displace our awareness of God. So on this show, we look at all of those different dynamics to help us not just like be well with each other, but also pay attention to what's going on in us, but also to relax into God's presence. One of the things we do every week on this show is we pause and we light a candle. We're reminded by John that God is light and in him is no darkness at all. And I just find because God is invisible, sometimes it can be difficult to remember the Lord. And just by lighting a candle, it's just a visual reminder. So those of you joining me on video, you can watch this, maybe light your own candle. Those of you on audio, you can just be more mindful right now, whatever it is you're doing, even if you're in the midst of driving or out exercising or something, just to be mindful to relax into God's presence as I light it. Okay. One of the challenges I think today is that when we talk about anxiety, we use the singular word anxiety. Uh, on the one hand, I think it's a good thing that culture is talking about anxiety more than we were even 10 years ago. I think that's great. The problem is we're still using the singular anxiety. I think it'd be much more helpful if we use the plural anxieties because there are so many different types. And what's interesting is there are different types of anxiety that often have very little in common with each other. Most people, when they think of the word anxiety, they think worry and fear. But really, one way that's helpful to think of anxiety is the word reactivity. And you can be asking yourself, what makes me reactive? But there's all kinds of anxiety. There's grief. There's the kind of anxiety that requires mental health medication, like depression. There's trauma. That's a type of anxiety. There's acute anxiety when you or a loved one might be in danger. Like I grew up in Western Australia, and sometimes when you're out hiking in a remote place, you get kind of a snaky feeling like, oh, I think there's a snake around here. And, almost always in Western Australia, if you see a snake, that's not good. That's acute anxiety. That's when you or a loved one might be in danger. My field is what's known as chronic anxiety. Chronic anxiety is fascinating because it's always generated by a false need that feels real in the moment. If you want to chase that more, my last episode got into false needs and also my first few episodes of Being Human. You can learn more about your false needs. But today I have a wonderful guest, Dr. Jennifer Ripley. She not only wrote and contributed to, but was the general editor of this incredible book, Ministering to Families in Crisis. It's kind of a mental health Bible, not just for churches, but for really any person who wants to learn more about how to help people in difficult moments of their life. In this episode, Jennifer and I get into all kinds of anxiety, and we do one of my favorite things to do, which is to run a bunch of cases. I ran Jennifer kind of through a gauntlet of cases on this episode. I think you're going to find it really helpful, really relatable. Here's my conversation with Jennifer. Okay, Jen, welcome to Being Human. You have edited and overseen this incredible resource, Ministering to Families in Crisis, the essential guide for nurturing mental and emotional health. I would love to hear about this book. How would you describe it to people?
This is a book that church leaders and even lay people can take and help them when they are trying to provide care ministries or just be a good neighbor to the people in their Sunday school class or their small group or the people sitting next to them in the pew. And they have some struggles, they have some things going on in their lives, and you'd like to be more effective, but you're not quite sure how. What we did is put together a great team of experts and offer this as a chance for people to take what you know about a topic and in one short chapter, even be able to pull it off the shelf, read a chapter, and then be able to be more helpful to your parishioner, your friend that's struggling.
Yeah, it's really a comprehensive guide to the current top struggles that every human faces. It's not simply mental health. You get quite broad. You cover divorce, you cover LGBTQ situations, domestic violence. It's really kind of intended, as I read it, to be um, the reference for whatever you or your loved ones or your congregants are facing. Um, yeah, what you've got 26 specialists that came on here. How did you know where to stop? Like you could just keep writing on different topics.
We could have done 5 books probably on a variety of topics. But when we put our heads together, I had a great team. So Dr. Jim Sells and Diane Chandler, who's a specialist in spiritual formation. She's divinity faculty. We put our heads together and said, what do people in the church run into? What are the road bumps? What are the struggles that we all run into that we see ourselves when we're in our own churches, but that we hear from church leaders? And so all 3 of us work with churches frequently. And we kind of started saying, okay, what do people complain about? What do people come to us with questions about? What do we hear from our friends who are also doing ministries to churches? And so we put together this list and we went through with our connections of psychiatrists and counselors and psychologists and a lawyer and clinicians, pastoral care providers. We really wanted to get a wide variety. And, they were the best group of people. I've been a part of edited books before, and it's pretty common that you get to the deadline and then you hear from the editor, well, we have a few chapters left and it's going to be, and then like a year goes by and then you finally every single person, every single writing team on this made their deadlines. Like this has probably never happened in the history of books ever. This was just an amazing group of people who were really bought in to the idea of, hey, I could write a chapter that could be really helpful to a pastor, a Sunday school teacher, a small group leader who is trying to be actually helpful on trauma or domestic violence or general spiritual formation in the family or children on screens and screen use, all kinds of varieties of issues. So, yeah.
It feels to me, Jen, that ministry has just gotten exponentially more complex in the last 30 to 40 years. I mean, it
Mhm.
wasn't exactly a picnic, 2 generations ago. But as I've experienced, whether it's formal ministry like a pastor or, as you said, like a Bible study leader, it seems like a lot of people expect the church to know what to do in extremely complex, specialized situations. Like I always felt as a lead pastor,
Mm.
sometimes the criticism is, well, the church should blank, and then they would fill in the blank. The church should do more about suicide prevention. The church should do more about generational systemic poverty. The church should do more about mental health. And part of me says, yes, we shouldn't. And part of me says, well, it's not like you know what to do either, critic. Like it's almost like the critic can't manage their anxiety, and so they're just looking to dump it on this thing called the church. What's your reaction to that?
That resonates for me, definitely. And there's so many types of anxiety happening, and people are worried about issues of race, issues of poverty, issues of mental health, disability. There's just so many things. And I have been around church leadership roles often enough to know everybody wants you to handle all those things. We need a ministry for everything, right? I need a
Yeah.
ministry for everything. And I feel for church leaders and pastors and elders, the people making decisions for churches who are like, yes, we love our congregation and we really want to make sure we can address issues of disability with kids in the church or something. And they're like, okay, let's do that. And then, okay, let's do mental illness. Okay, let's do domestic violence. And it's a lot. It really is. And maybe the huge mega churches can do that. I don't know. I've never been a part of a mega church myself, but the small to medium sized churches that I've attended, we're just doing our best with what we have. And so that was the hope is I'm a pastor, if I'm a small group leader and I'm just trying to be helpful to people, but I've never been trained in this. We don't have a whole full ministry on this in our church. How can I learn a few things, get some principles, help reduce my anxieties around that so that I can be more of a calm presence in the face of whatever struggle is coming? Yeah.
Almost every city I've ministered in, whatever the size,
Mhm.
has a group of nonprofit and government leaders that gather on a regular basis to address these challenges.
Yeah.
The city I moved to pastor at the time when I got here was 30,000 people. That's not a big city. Our church was small. When I came, we had 150 people, including kids. And yet, there was still a group that met once a month, and it was the local food bank leader. It was the human services social workers. It was about 30 different people in our city. What we all had in common is we were on the front lines of helping people in need. And I find myself, Jen, passing that message along to so many church leaders is if you are in a smaller congregation and you've still got all of these issues coming at you, but you can't tackle all of them, you
Mhm.
can join a peer group. You can join your city's support group that is actually helping quite comprehensively. We would go around the circle every month. It was always amazing. And we would introduce ourselves because almost every month we had a guest. We'd
Yeah.
say, here's who I am, here's what I do. And then the second time around the circle, the leader said, okay, does anybody have a client that needs help? And then they would share, oh, I've got this single mother, I'm trying to help her. And then we would all just popcorn it. Oh, I can do that. Our church can help with that. And I just wanted to share that, Jen, because I do think a lot of faith leaders feel so overwhelmed by the need, but God usually has a group of helpers in your town or city. You just have to find them. I was in a fairly unchurched city, even you might even say hostile to church. So I kind of did have to push my way into that meeting a little bit. They were quite uneasy when a local evangelical pastor showed up. In fact, one of the social workers said to me very poignantly, she said, you picket the people I try to help. And it was
Mm.
quite a moment. I said, well, I don't pick up, but I understand what you're saying. And, I had to earn trust, but that group became an incredible resource. Our church still is part of that group today.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. In my local area, even there's a homeless ministry that provides a wide variety of things, and they've become a good bit of a hub for other ministries. And I recently was working with them they had already created a directory. Everything from somebody needs to get their bicycle fixed. There's ministries for that in the community, right? To food pantries, to tutoring services, to counseling services. And they had created this directory. It was fantastic. And I had one of my grad students actually take it and update it because it was a few years old. And we had this new collection. So even if there isn't an existing group that's meeting regularly, which is better to be embodied, to be in person, to share with each other is even better. But there may be a hub or a group that's already doing that. And people that are serving the underserved often know everybody else in town who also does that.
Yeah, I think that's the encouraging news. Now you are, I think, what most of us would call a specialist. You are a PhD professor in the field of psychology and counseling. Would you mind coming alongside on this show? Let's say your average Bible study leader, your small group leader, they're volunteering 5 or 10 hours of their time, opening up their home, and it's a Bible study, but one lady for the first time shares her battle with depression. And she's even willing to admit in that Bible study that she sometimes thinks about suicide. And now that Bible study leader is a little freaked out. They really want to help. They're afraid of doing the wrong thing. If you were their coach, how would you guide them? What's their next couple of steps?
Yeah, I think that's a great and common situation. I know I have had that situation in small groups that I fled to. Of course, I have training as a psychologist, but if you don't have that, I think there's some really good principles to pull. One is the principle of being a calm presence. When Christ was walking the earth, he was calm, right? So he was facing all kinds of very difficult problems all around him. And people were coming to him with life and death situations. And he repeatedly had a calmness to him. And so I think that we can follow the example of Jesus when we see someone with depression or someone with something else that we don't even understand what those words mean. And maybe they're thinking about self-harm, or they have a history they've been cutting in the past or something like that. It can be very overwhelming. This is new. This is Am I supposed to know what a counselor knows about this? I'm a small group leader. Am I supposed to know those things? No, you don't. You don't need to know all those things. You can rest and be assured that you can do really helpful things by being a good listener and by staying calm in the face and then accessing resources. So those would be the 3 steps that I would say is 1, turn to Jesus for calmness and even praying together. Praying for someone who's suffering is a huge deal. And then listening to that person, letting them share. They're not expecting you to be their counselor. They're not expecting you to know all about what's happening in their lives, but it matters. I can even tell you a little bit of a story. I went through a really difficult time myself some years ago. Our extended family life, we were going through just one of those things that you just kind of cry on Sundays, and you get tearful. And I'm sitting in the balcony of my church and I'm getting tearful in the worship service. And someone that knew me, but not too well, came over to me. Kelly is her name. And she knew a little bit about what was going on. And she had been through that herself. And she just said, "Would you like to get coffee? Can I pray for you?" And that began a friendship that has lasted for many years. In fact, she just texted me yesterday, "Praying for you, Jen," and it is honestly more than a counselor or a psychologist could provide for me in many ways, because she's a friend and she can be with me. She can sit with me in things at a coffee shop. She can share her own personal experiences as a mom, as a wife, as a family member. And she doesn't have to. She's not getting paid for this. This isn't her job, right? So I think if you're a church leader or you're a Kelly on a balcony who knows, like, hey, I've been through some of this before and I know how to pray, then there's an opportunity there to listen. And then if things get above and beyond our abilities, to be able to go to your church leader or go to a local resource, whether that's medical or psychological, to get the help that you need to refer the person.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Um, when a loved one is grieving, maybe you're a church leader, maybe you're just a friend like this lady Kelly, and your friend or a congregant has lost a spouse, for example. What is helpful to do and what's not helpful to do?
Yeah. I was recently just writing something about this for a website, and there's stages. So the way I framed that one was there's things to do right away. So right away after someone loses a loved one, if you are close to the family or close to the person, there's practical things. And churches tend to be pretty good at this. So, do you need me to mow your lawn? I can bring some food over, right? I can get your car serviced for you. Like all of those kinds of things, the practical help. People generally are in shock and they're got a heavy struggle just to make it through the day. So those kinds of helps can be a big help to somebody. Once they get past the first month or two and all of the attention starts to go away, the funeral is over, the family has gone back home, there's another level, I think, of help, and that is the listener help. This is sitting down with someone. I had a friend who lost her husband, and one of the things I try to do myself is about 4 months or so after losing the person to say, "Hey, you want to go get dinner?" And to sit down and just say, "What's it been like?" And without exception, I have yet to have someone say, "I've got all my needs met." What they generally say is, "People were really good for the first month or two, but now I'm feeling like everyone's left, right? I've lost my network. All of my husband's friends and family are doing their own thing now, and they're struggling on their own grieving. And I'm by myself, and no one knows what to say to me." And there's a real opportunity there for ministry to just listen and have dinner or coffee.
Yeah, I really appreciate that what you said right at the end too, Jen, because I think sometimes people want to talk about their grief, and sometimes the last thing they want to talk about is their grief. They just the gift could be just a normal coffee as you share what's going on in your life, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's helpful. I think what happens, I think sometimes we're so anxious that we're going to do the wrong thing that we tend to avoid people in complex pain. How do you help leaders notice that about themselves? If they find themselves avoiding people in complex situations, it's usually because the leader's afraid. What's their next step to step into that pain and be helpful?
Yeah. Well, you bring up a really good one there, Steve, because noticing it is the first step, right? Just kind of knowing your own personal style. If you're the kind of person that when in pain, you tend to kind of step back and give yourself time and space. If you'd rather read a book or take a walk alone, right, than to go towards the problem, right? So some people deal with struggles with doing that. Other people deal with them by like jumping in. Let me fix everything. Let me do all the right thing. I'll set up a casserole schedule for you, right? And that's their way of dealing with pain. And so I think the first step is to really understand yourself and to know, what type of pain do you provide? Or what is normal for you on all of that. So that's important to know. If you're an avoider, then I think it's useful to consider what does it mean for me to want to avoid and how can I keep the calm, address my own anxiety, bring that to Jesus, process that with a friend, talk it out, journal about it. These are all natural ways to do that. And yet step in, right? Make a quick call. It can be brief, even if it's very overwhelming to you. But, a 10-minute phone call with someone who's struggling can make a really big difference.
Yeah. What if your problem, Jen, isn't that you're a avoider? What if you're an explainer? Somebody brings their very complex problem to you, and you are prone to shrinking it down to a piece of advice or a Bible verse. What's your guidance for those anxious explainers?
Yeah, I sympathize. I mean, I'm a professor, so kind of explaining things is a little bit of what we do as professors. So I sympathize with wishing that problems, particularly complex, painful problems, could be solved with something as simple as a verse. And it may even be that the principle behind the verse, right, that you're trying to share is a key to health and healing. That very well may be true, but I think we have to be humble. I think that's what you're pointing um, to be able to self assess and say, oh, I'm uncomfortable. I have anxiety around this issue. I feel like I need to jump in and care for that person. I need to take the pain away from them and I need to make them okay. And what we often don't do is to ponder, why am I doing that? Like, why do I want to make them okay? Often it's because I want to make me okay. Like, I'm uncomfortable with your pain, your grief, right? Your loss. And so I'm hoping if I come in and say, the Lord never gives more than anyone can handle, right? This is a classic. Most people know not to say that, but
Yeah.
you may want to say that because you're hoping it will have some kind of magical ability to fix them. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Some spiritual version of look on the bright side, some kind
Right.
of,
Right. Exactly. That would
yeah.
be great if we could look on the bright side. So I think we have to like manage that in ourselves, recognize it, manage it, and then being able to just sit. The person's pain and struggle is not going to go away quickly, usually, especially if it's the loss of a family member like that. And it's also not going to be solved with any particular single words or anything you say. So let that go. Like, there's no reason to feel like you need to do that. You can really just not be Job's friends. You can actually sit with them and be a good friend to them. Yeah.
Okay, Jen. So then the third category of people that really common in church, I guess I would call us, and it's an us, are the overcommitters.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I have taken on someone who wanted help. My default is to think that they think like me. Maybe, let's just say, maybe they have a very complex and long standing mental illness. And
Mm.
so the way they see the world is very different. Maybe they've even been chronically poor or had seasons of homelessness. So therefore, there's a desperation in this person. And sometimes that desperation then becomes manipulation. I know in my own journey, Jen, I used to think that people manipulating me were terrible people. And I think it helped me to realize, oh, they're just desperate. They're using every resource they can to get their needs met. But I find myself now overcommitting. As a pastor, I've helped a number of my congregants, beautiful, pure hearted, wanting to follow Jesus. Suddenly, this person is in their home, not paying rent, breaking promises. Every bit of help is being chronically undone. This is more common in churches than I think we talk about, is because churches really are a wonderful, welcoming, loving place. And therefore,
Yeah.
people in chronic, desperate need know how to find people who are pure hearted and want to help. And now they're in this dance. I just gave you a fairly complex one, but it is common. What's your thought on that one?
Yeah. Oh, you've been around church. I can see. Yeah. And there is a tendency to want to be able to dive into the most difficult kinds of needs. Like you said, someone who's homeless, who's substance abusing, maybe they have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, even. And there's a hope that somehow the church community will be able to address that. So a little bit of education can be helpful. And is one of the reasons we wrote the book, is to have more of a knowledge base of what is it that we're looking for. But even those of us who have a knowledge base, right? Counselors and psychologists and social workers, pastoral care providers who are well trained, don't take on the need to fix the person. In fact, when I train brand new therapists, so one of my jobs is I train brand new therapists, right? And so they're brand new. In fact, I just had a conversation this week with someone, and we've been talking about a client who has some pretty significant, difficult issues. So this is in professional counseling now, right? And it's a bit of, we need to accept that this is the functioning level that a person is at. Pray for them. Absolutely. Pray for them. Offer opportunities for them to change and grow. Absolutely. But we can't take on the responsibility of their wellness as our responsibility. They have to be the ones to walk that path. And our job is to come alongside in ways that we can. So that may be things like, hey, we do have a food pantry here at church. It looks like that could be helpful to you. Would you like me to set that up for you? And if they do, great. And if they don't, then that was their choice. That's really hard, I think, sometimes for church people to do, is to say they have a choice and their choice is not a healthy one, but God gave them the choice. So I don't know why we would overstep that boundary.
Yeah, I know in my own life, like I used to do crisis intervention pastoring in Las Vegas. I was on staff at a very large church, thousands of people. And it was as you call it, a mega church. And the leadership of that church were incredibly generous to our department. We were incredibly well funded. We
Yeah,
kind of ran like a volunteer level social work community among my volunteers and so on. The problem, of course, being that we were over our head a lot as well-meaning amateurs, and I just found myself, Jen, I've found myself in this situation with people in chronic need who are on the edge of brink or homelessness or who are homeless. I found myself in the same situation, Jen, when I'm on a global trip and there's overwhelming, grinding global poverty in a developing country. I get confused what the goal is. Like, if I'm not careful, I don't realize that I'm trying to turn everybody into a middle class person like me.
yeah,
And I hope that's not too blunt to say, but it's like, what is, when somebody's paranoid schizophrenic and they're a part of your church and they won't take their medication because their very disease tells them not to, which is so cruel and tragic.
it's rough. Yeah.
I lose sight of the goal in my over functioning. What are we doing? Is it friendship? Is that enough? Is it a welcoming community? Is that enough? I find myself crossing into areas that I'm not trained in. And I don't know, in my desire to help people, it gets confusing, I think, what we're actually doing.
Yeah, I find this a very helpful conversation, Steve, to just be able to think through that overfunctioning and what's driving the overfunctioning, right?
Yeah.
The desire to um, everyone who goes on an overseas trip, if you've ever led a group like that, does have that experience of like, oh, maybe I should empty my bank account so I can help. Or my
Or,
sister in law went on a trip to Haiti once and someone offered her their child. Yeah, right. So, like,
yeah.
they were in a poverty zone. This was before the current
Yeah.
situation. So there's that sense of like, wow, I'm becoming very aware of my privilege. That if I have mental health, if I have physical health, if I have, a stable income and a home to live in, and not everyone has that. So what's the right response? What's the good Christian response to that? Is to be generous in ways that are fair to my own family, right? I'm not going to like give away my home and let 10 homeless people move in who might mistreat my young adult daughter, that would not be safe for them. So to be wise in our response and collectively to be generous is probably better than being individually generous. But sometimes we do be individually generous. I'm not saying you should never become a sponsor to someone who's homeless and take on a role that's a little extra, but with a level of humility and wisdom, with collaboration with others. Does your pastor think this is a good idea? Does your family think this is a good idea? Really thinking that through before you take on an extra level. People do this sometimes when someone comes as a refugee to the United States and they sponsor them, right? So just being thoughtful, but there are limits too. You don't let them live with you forever. And it takes real wisdom. It's not easy to make those boundaries that are clear and defined
Yeah.
for others. Mhm.
I love that. I think every church, like something a church leader can do as a gift to your volunteer leaders is like what we've talked about, Jen, make a list of the resources in your city. If
Mhm.
you're a church leader and you're in this audience and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know the resources in my city, what a great place to start. Jen, you even shared that one of your grad students updated that list. That's something that any staff member or volunteer in the church can do for the church. Like, I know as a lead pastor, Jen, I always felt like I need 10 things less to do, not one thing more to do. But your congregation can build a resource list, but you can also give your people the gift of understanding what can we do and what do professionals do, and just try
Mhm.
to stay in our lane. That's where I find many of us fall into trouble is we try to do what professionals are trained to do, but in fact, learning that really what the church offers, which is community, worship, listening, care, like that's good. Like those are good things. They're valuable. That's how you started this conversation with us, is really reminding us that the thing you're already good at is what those people need.
Mhm.
Anything that you'd like to add to that as a general idea?
Yeah, that is really so important. I think, particularly as Western culture has gotten further and further away from being good neighbors and good listeners and having those interpersonal skills. So even now, my good friend who helped co-edit this book, Jim Sells, and I are building a program called The Church Cares, which is providing support for churches and just training people in listening, lay helping, peer-to-peer help for anyone who has any normal problem of life. And I think that everyone's interested in being helpful in that way, or many people in a church are, but we really are watching some of those skills erode in Western culture. And so how can we as a church really take that on as this is something we can be a light in darkness and we can care for our neighbors in ways that are useful, but not so much that we overextend. If I'm a church of 100 people, we're not going to start 15 different ministries to every type of disability and every type of mental illness. And we're not going to have the crisis response team that you had in Las Vegas. That's not something we can do, but we can provide a good community and we can be kind and generous and careful. and thoughtful and allow people to be a part of us fully,
Mm.
whatever they bring to the room. Yeah.
Jen, it's such a good word. And we can also deepen our knowledge, which is really why you wrote this book. The book is Ministering to Families in Crisis, the essential guide for nurturing mental and emotional health. Jen's a contributor. She's also one of the general editors. There are 26 different contributors to this book. So for our audience, the range of topics is functionally almost every situation that is a difficult challenge that might come to you, and it's designed to help you be more helpful. And as Jen said, we'll put a link in the show notes. Her and her team developing this workshop that you can bring her in or contact her for more information. The
Mhm.
workshop's called The Church Cares. It's 2025. All of us can grow in our knowledge and our wisdom about this. Jen, I know that you know that the gauntlet of anxiety questions are coming, and I can see through the screen your fear and trepidation. Even though you are, in fact,
I love your
a,
show, Steve.
a chair of psychology and a doctorate, I get the terror, and you have every reason to be terrified. Before we move into the gauntlet, I was teaching a workshop last night. I was out late last night with a group doing a couple of workshops for their church. One was for their staff and then one for their congregation. And before we started the congregational one, the event leader, the pastor threw to her, the lady that put on the event for us, and the pastor said, "Michelle, would you pray for us?" You know, most events in churches start with prayer. And she said, "Well, let's sing the doxology." And instead of a typical prayer, we all just stood a cappella and we sang the doxology. And Jen, I've never had that experience before I get up to
Yeah.
speak, that somebody just leads us in a singing prayer. And it just reminded me why human voice in worship is a gift to our mental health. Like I was singing and also thinking, can you be anxious and sing together at the same time? Does singing actually displace anxiety? It was really, really striking. Any reaction to that before I
I
throw the gauntlet at you?
really great and beautiful. Like let's not just me put words to this and everyone nod along, but let's bring our voices together in this ancient prayer. That's beautiful. I will say too, years ago I had a student who did a dissertation on worship, music, and um, mood, basically, right? Like management of mood
Mm,
regulation kind of thing. And definitely he found nice correlations with that. So there's even some data behind that idea that we can use that collective choir voice of church, collective singing voice, and it brings us all in that kind of perfect peace, right? Towards that anyway, perfect
mm,
peace of Christ. Yeah.
mm. Well, Jen, without further ado, the Being Human Gauntlet of Anxiety. 4 questions for you. These are rapid fire, short response, which is cruel because they can be more deeper questions. Here's the first one. What is one way that you treat others that if you started to treat yourself the same way, your life would be better?
Um, and I tried not to prepare for this so I could just do it.
Okay.
I knew it was coming. In treating of others, I think that I have a tendency to respond quickly and with availability as much as possible with others, but I also set boundaries with myself. And I mean, other people treat me that way. So I think that if I take that on myself, I would have a better world if I'm responding quickly, but I'm setting good boundaries on my time, even like turn off work and hours, take my Sabbath, like just to be disciplined about that would be great.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay, very good. Okay, question number 2. Do you experience a gap between what you believe about Jesus versus what you experience from Jesus?
Definitely. Jesus has been working with me lately on enjoying his face while he enjoys my face. That's
Mm,
been a theme of prayers lately. And I think that's a cutting edge because I can feel like God is a taskmaster from some of my own life experiences and personality. And instead, just enjoying Jesus's face as he smiles at me, just like a parent smiles at a small child and is so delighted in their face, and for me to be delighted in his face.
okay, I love that answer. That was fantastic. Okay, number 3, when the local church is at its best, what is something it offers that you can't get anywhere else?
Besides good casseroles, I have to say, casserole ministry is real and it's a good thing. It's real. I love that. And the other thing I love about church ministries is that everybody is there. Um, I have people in my Sunday school class at church who didn't finish high school and other people who have high education like me. And we are all the same in front of Jesus as we study the Bible together in the Sunday school class or as we worship and sing together in church. That I don't find that anywhere else in my life. Yeah.
Okay, great. Final question. When in your life lately have you felt most fully and completely loved?
Hmm. My daughter yesterday sent me a gratitude email. She's 24. And gosh, it brought tears to my eyes and made me feel deeply loved. She sent me a little song that she found and told me that she appreciates me. And wow, that was that that's definitely the right answer to that from my personal life this week. So
My guest has been Dr. Jennifer Ripley. She's the professor of integration at Regent University School of Psychology and Counseling. She's also the co-director of the Caris Institute. Jen is the general editor or one of the general editors and contributor to the remarkable guide, this book, Ministering to Families in Crisis, the essential guide for nurturing mental and emotional health. Links in the show notes. Jen, thanks so much for coming on Being Human.
thank you, Steve. It was really a privilege.